The sun had just begun to set when the sound of a child's sob echoed across the quiet street. Little Arham stood clutching the broken pieces of his favorite toy truck, his tiny hands trembling as tears rolled down his cheeks. His mother knelt beside him, trying to comfort him, but the bruise on her arm told a different story. Moments earlier, a group of factory workers on loud motorbikes had passed through the neighborhood, laughing as they carelessly knocked over the boy's toy, and when his mother tried to stop them, one of them had pushed her aside. The small crowd that had gathered watched in silence, unsure what to do. But across the road, a few local bikersmen who usually kept to themselves had seen everything. Their eyes met, and without a word, one of them started his engine. The rest followed, the deep rumble of their bikes cutting through the still air like a warning. Arham's mother looked up, her heart pounding, unsure if she should be afraid or hopeful. The child's tears slowed as he watched the group of riders turn toward the direction of the old factory, the same place the troublemakers had gone. The air grew heavy with tension, the sound of engines fading into the distance. No one spoke. Everyone just stood there, waiting to see what would happen next. Because sometimes, in a quiet town, justice doesn't come from the police, it comes from those who've had enough. The town of Nurabad had always been quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and problems. But lately, the factory on the edge of town had changed everything. It was once a source of jobs and hope, but now it had become a place people whispered about. The new owners brought in workers from outside, rough men who rode through the streets late at night, drinking, shouting, and scaring the locals. No one dared to stand up to them, until today. Arham's mother, Samra, was a widow who worked long hours at a small tailoring shop. Her son's toy truck was a gift she'd saved for months to buy, something simple that brought him joy in their modest life. When the bikers shattered it, something in her broke too. But she hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone react. The riders who had stepped in, Rizwan, Nabil, and Aftab, weren't troublemakers. They were old friends who ran a small motorcycle garage nearby. Years ago, they'd worked at that same factory before quitting over unfair treatment. The place held memories they'd rather forget. But seeing a child cry and a mother hurt lit a fire in them they couldn't ignore. As their bikes neared the factory gate, the air grew thicker with the smell of oil and smoke. A guard stood at the entrance, already reaching for his radio. Inside, the laughter of the men echoed faintly. The riders exchanged a look. This wasn't going to be a simple talk. Rizwan slowed his bike just before the factory gate, the others pulling up beside him. The dim lights from the yard flickered against their faces, revealing the quiet determination in their eyes. They weren't here to start a fight, they just wanted answers. But deep down, each of them knew the men inside wouldn't take kindly to questions. Inside the factory, the air was thick with the hum of old machines and careless laughter. The workers, most of them hired on temporary contracts, didn't seem to care about the damage they left behind in the town. Some said the new factory manager encouraged their behavior, believing fear was the best way to keep control. It wasn't just about Arham's toy or Samray's bruise anymore. It was about what the factory had done to everyone's peace. Back in the neighborhood, Samra sat with her son on the porch, watching the night stretch on. She tried calling Rizwan's garage, but no one answered. Her mind raced with worry. The town elders, hearing what had happened, gathered in hushed voices, unsure whether to get involved. People had complained about the factory before, but every time they tried, someone higher up shut them down. Meanwhile, inside the gate, the guard radioed a warning to the manager. 3 men on bikes. They're looking for trouble, he muttered. The laughter from inside faded. A heavy silence filled the air. Rizwan looked at his friends and nodded once. Whatever was waiting for them inside. There was no turning back now. The heavy gate creaked open as Rizwan and his friends stepped inside, the sound echoing across the dark yard. The faint glow from a few flickering bulbs revealed broken crates, oil stains, and the shadow of the factory's tall chimneys looming above. Every step they took seemed to carry the weight of the town's silence. Nabil's hand tightened around his helmet, his eyes scanning the corners. They're here somewhere, he whispered. From the far end of the warehouse came the low hum of laughter that quickly faded when the bikers' engines went quiet. The factory men, 5 of them, emerged from behind the stacked boxes, their expressions shifting from amusement to annoyance. At the center stood the factory manager, a tall man with sharp eyes who looked like he'd been expecting them. You boys lost? He asked with a smirk, his tone calm but mocking. Rizwan didn't answer right away. He looked at the man, then at the workers. You scared a child and hurt his mother? He said quietly, his voice steady but burning with anger. The air turned still. For a moment no one moved. Then the manager stepped closer, the sound of his boots scraping against the floor. You think you can walk in here and lecture us? He said. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Outside, Samra paced restlessly, her hands trembling. In the distance, faint rumbles of engines echoed again, low and uncertain. Something was happening inside that factory, and whatever it was about to change everything. Just as the tension inside the factory reached its peak, a sudden noise echoed from the far corner, a deep rumble of engines that didn't belong to Rizwan's group. Everyone turned. Out of the shadows rolled 3 more bikes, their headlights slicing through the dim light. For a second Rizwan thought more of the factory men had arrived, but then he recognized the faces, locals from the next town over. riders who had once worked with them before leaving after a dispute with the same factory manager. Their arrival shifted the energy completely. The manager's confident smirk faltered for the first time. "You called for backup," one of the workers whispered, glancing uneasily at the newcomers. But Rizwan hadn't called anyone. The men had heard what happened from a friend at the gas station and came to see if the rumors were true. But the factory had finally crossed the line. The air grew heavier as both groups stood facing each other. The factory workers looked uncertain now, but the manager wasn't ready to back down. He pulled out his phone, dialing someone quickly. "If they want to play hero," he said under his breath, "let's see how long they last." Outside, Samra saw flashing lights in the distance, vehicles heading toward the factory. Her heart raced. She didn't know if it was the police or more trouble. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. Inside the gates, engines idled, voices rose, and the air felt charged as if the smallest spark could set everything ablaze. The factory yard was filled with tension so thick it felt like time had stopped. Engines growled softly in the background, and every eye was fixed on the manager. Just as he raised his phone again, the sound of sirens broke through the night. For a split second, everyone froze. Then a few factory men tried to run, only to stop when the gates swung open. The police cars came rushing in, their flashing lights cutting through the shadows. Rizwan's heart pounded. He thought someone must have called them to stop the fight. But then Samra's voice echoed from outside. She had gone to the station herself, afraid of what might happen. When she stepped into the yard, holding Arham's hand tightly, the crowd went silent. The little boy looked around, his eyes landing on the broken toy truck that Rizwan had picked up and set on a crate nearby. The police quickly stepped between the two groups, questioning the manager and his men. As it turned out, the factory had already been under investigation for illegal activities and worker mistreatment. The officers recognized the manager's name instantly. Within minutes, he was taken into custody, his face pale under the flashing lights.